For more on this, environmental consultant Wael Hmaidan joins us from Beirut. Thank you so much for joining us here on Money Talks. This is the first time the One Planet Summit has been held in Africa. Talk to us about the impact climate change is having on the African continent.
Well, the impacts of climate change on Africa are not less than catastrophic. I know the polar caps are the iconic figure for climate impacts, but if really we want to see what climate change means, you need to look at Africa for two main reasons. One is geographical locations. For each degree of average global warming, Africa will warm up by 1.5 degrees, so it will warm faster than the rest of the world, and this will create huge impacts. And second, because Africa has low capability to adapt to climate impacts. 25% of the population still lives in extreme poverty. So any change in the natural world, which the populations depend on, will have huge impact on the economy and the people. For example, 95% of farming in Africa is rain-fed. So any change in participation will create huge catastrophic impacts on the farming world in Africa. Out of every 3 individuals, 2 are farmers in Africa, and it's expected, for example, by 2100 that in some countries the farming sector will be completely removed. Niger, for example, Zambia, Chad, they will lose their entire farming sector. Also, we've already seen some catastrophic impacts, like in the East African droughts that we witnessed in 2011, which created a huge famine there, created political instability, and we've all seen the news how it created a lot of socioeconomic crisis. Rain change, loss of precipitation, loss of fresh water. The Nile River will lose most of its water if climate change is not adapted. And not only rain and agriculture, but also diseases. Malaria, which is now only exists in coastal tropical areas in East Africa, West Africa, because of climate change and increased temperature, mosquitoes will be able to spread further and cross the 2,000-meter altitude threshold that they didn't exist before and go to the African highlands, creating big malaria breakouts, despite all efforts to try to control this disease.
You're really painting some dire situations there in Africa. Do you think Africa is being overlooked in the fight against climate change?
I don't think it's overlooked. The scientific community is very clear on this. The International Panel of Climate Change reports clearly show what Africa will suffer from, the World Bank and others. And it is estimated that Africa will need 20 to 30 billion US dollars every year to fight climate change. So people are aware of this, and the One Planet Summit being put there is an example of the interest of the world to tackle it. But it's a real challenge. Getting $20–30 billion into Africa every year will be very hard. But there's an opportunity. There's an opportunity to invest in low carbon development. Understanding of the private sector of climate financial risk is on the increase. And now, after the Paris Agreement went into force, investment in low carbon development is more interesting. And Africa is definitely a big investment opportunity for the future. And it is an opportunity to create an economic model for Africa to resolve it. Mm-hmm. It is a big challenge. It is hard, but there is an opportunity to solve it. There is hope.
Okay, so that's some encouraging news. Much of the talk at the summit has been about Africa's forests. Why are they so important?
Well, forests are important to combat climate change, of course. We all know the main function of trees for us. They are the lungs of the earth. They take CO2 out of the atmosphere and bring oxygen. We have the Amazon and we have the tropical forests in Africa. They also create microclimates. They help control the climate. If you deforest an area, it's easier to become desertification there, and also introduce vector diseases. Forests also protect from vector diseases. So there's multiple function of forests, and it is the cheapest way at the moment to combat climate change. Instead of building big infrastructure for renewable energy, reforestation and protecting forests is a cheap and effective way to fight climate change.
Mm-hmm. So is it possible to reverse the damage that's already been done in Africa?
Well, there is a climate change impact that we cannot escape. And when we talk about 20 to 30 billion US dollars of support annually needed in Africa, this is for unabated climate impacts, i.e. that we cannot avoid these impacts. We need to spend this money. We need to reduce global emissions to avoid future impact that could be avoided. And this is not the responsibility of Africa. As you mentioned, Africa is only responsible for 4% of global emissions. This is where the US, where industrial countries need to reduce emissions so that Africa does not reach really dangerous zones of no return.
All right, Wael Hmaidan, thank you for joining us so much today on Money Talks.